Good day, guys, and welcome to episode 111 of the Teacher Emilio podcast. Somebody messaged me saying, hey teacher, so you are a runner and it would be nice if you share your story of how you started running, because this year I would like to start running. Yeah. And a few things hit me. Like the first one is, wow, this is pretty cool, because I was actually thinking of making a video about New Year's resolutions and how it is important to be accountable to ourselves and try and achieve whatever it is that we want to achieve, right? And I thought of touching on a few things that I do myself that maybe some of you might copy, or maybe some of you do, or maybe you might find it useful somehow, right? But then that was one thing, of course, and we'll talk a bit more about that later on in this episode and on this video as well. But then the second thing is that a part of me thought, I don't consider myself a runner. I run occasionally. Yes, I did mention in my trip in Japan that I was doing some running, but again, being completely honest with you, I don't call myself a runner. And I guess the same thing happened when I was doing long distance races in triathlon. Even though I've done, an Olympic triathlon, a half Ironman, a full Ironman, and a race that is about the same difficulty, let's say, as one day in Tour de France in cycling. But that one I barely made it. Yeah, mini disclaimer, I barely made it. But after telling you all that, I still wouldn't say to you guys or to people that, oh, I'm a triathlete. And I was doing triathlon for what, like a good 2 to 3 years maybe. I remember that my friend Nestorin, he would introduce me to people saying, hey, look, this is Emilio, he's a triathlete, he's done this and that. And we would not argue, but I would tell him no, I'm not a triathlete. On the same note, I don't call myself a runner. Recently, for the past few months, I started going to the gym again, and I don't call myself a bodybuilder or a gym rat or anything along those lines. Maybe this is just something about me. Maybe, let me know, because I guess the same thing could be said with my podcast. I don't say that I'm a podcaster, I say I have a podcast, and I don't say that I'm a YouTuber, although some people tell me, yes, you are a YouTuber. And if I am, then I suppose I'm a baby YouTuber and maybe a baby podcaster. But that's, outside of the topic. And this person asking this made me think, maybe, there might be some of you guys listening to this and watching this thinking, I would like to start something and I don't know what it might be. Sorry, I don't know how to do it, right? What I meant to say was that whatever that thing might be, maybe for some of you it could be running, maybe for some of you it might be just going to the gym, lifting weights. Maybe for some of you could be something like a different type of sport. Like in my case, it has been jump rope. Just because I started watching a boxing show last year, and now a part of me is oh, jump rope is really cool. It's also really efficient, in terms of hitting most of the body or the whole body, and also time efficient as well, compared to cycling and running as much as I like it. And I thought, maybe I'll share my experience, which is also what the student said. By the way, big thank you for reaching out and for telling me this. So I was told, Emilio, why don't you share your experience? How did you become a runner? So I'll maybe tell you a few stories, a few things about me, and basically how I started, I should say, or how I start new things. Basically, look, and again, before we begin, remember, I'm just sharing my story. Take this with a pinch of salt, but I think a lot of the things come down to personality and to how you approach things. In my case, though, sometimes, and I was thinking about this before filming, I think it comes down to one thing that sometimes maybe we all know about, but even if we know about it, some people may not be, let's say, completely aware of or maybe comfortable with that. And I think that if we get past through that thing, we can basically go ahead and do that thing, or to start that hobby, or to start on that new sport. It could even be, coming back to it is a different story. That's a different episode. So let me just first tell you what that thing is. And you might be surprised because it is not something magical or something new. It is, in plain and simple English, the feeling of being uncomfortable. The feeling of knowing that you are bad at something and that there is a long way to go. I think that is basically the biggest thing that would stop anybody to start something new. Like, if you see, for example, or when I start thinking about myself, right, with jump rope, I don't even know how good or bad I am. I'm going to say that I'm comfortably below average. if there is even like a level in jumping rope. I can jump rope, I don't know, for easily 10 to 15 minutes, no problem. Now I can do the cross jump like this. And maybe some of you listening and watching this may think, oh, that's so easy. I used to do that when I was a kid. Well, look, for me, it took me 30 years to grab a jump rope. I never used a jump rope in my life. So for me, doing a cross jump is such a big thing. And I feel like I'm the next Manny Pacquiao. Well, not really. But the point is, when I started doing jump rope, it was so uncomfortable because, well, one, I was the only guy at my gym doing it, and two, it was also pretty uncomfortable. Every 2 jumps, I'm hitting on my toes, and it's like, oh man, this sucks. I could easily be running, I could easily be on the cycling machine, I could just basically on the stationary bike, sorry, I could just do so many other things, but here I am jumping like an idiot, or not necessarily like an idiot, but you get my point, right? So, and on top of that, as I was just telling you a second ago, people look at you. So part of me is like, I know I'm bad at this, and people are looking at me, and then I hit, and then I hit. I would get scratches and slashes all over my body, mainly like my arms, as well as my calf, and of course on my toes, right? Never to the point that I would fall on the floor and it's super embarrassing, but uncomfortable enough to at least get me thinking about it, right? And a part of me was like, this is, I mean, I had that feeling, let's say, that feeling of being embarrassed. But then I suppose another part of me is like, of course you suck, of course you are bad. It is all about the process, right? And as crazy as this may sound, I would remember like the clip of people jumping rope on this anime that I'm watching right now. Well, sorry, the show that I was watching, it's finished already, the anime. It's called Hajime no Ippo. In case you like anime, or you know someone who likes anime or who likes boxing, I highly recommend that show. And yeah, I would just imagine the person jumping on the show, and I'm like, that looks really cool. Let me just try and copy that. Let me just try and get as close as I can to doing that. And obviously it's not something that happened like on a day, but as I started slowly, instead of like doing 2 jumps and then hitting myself, it was 3 jumps, 4 jumps, 10 jumps. And then after I got comfortable with maybe 20 jumps, I said, look, maybe I'm just gonna try and do as many jumps as I can for 1 minute. Then, you know, eventually I said, now let me just try and do jumps like opening my legs like this, or let me just do jumps back and forth. And then I said, look, let me see if I can really level things up. And this is like maybe 2 months after jumping rope. Let me try and do the cross jump like this. And I mean, you might see the clip that I just shared with you a second ago and think, oh wow, Emilio is so good. But this is just 10 seconds. I mean, I'm picking a part of a clip just to show you the progress. But if you were to come with me, I would be having like 10 minutes of me hitting, falling, you know, like wiping myself with the rope. And I think that what I'm trying to say with all of this is that whatever that sport or that activity is, you need to understand that it is a process. And again, going back to the phrase, it is not a sprint, it is a marathon. For the person who asked me about running, I would say it is the same thing. Like the first long run, or like the first proper run I said, when a part of me is like, oh, I'm gonna try this triathlon thing. I was super comfortable with cycling. I could cycle for 2 hours, 3 hours, no problem. But you put me on a run and oh my God, that was so tough. And like my first run that was for like an hour, after that run, a part of me is like, I hate this. Why did I even think of doing a triathlon? But I thought, let me just give it a try. Let's just not, you know, give up. Actually, I had a very similar feeling with swimming. Like, If I come up here and say, oh, I did an Ironman, I swam for almost 4 kilometers in the ocean, maybe you're gonna think, oh wow, Emilio is like a fish or something, or he's really good. No, let me tell you, I am, again, I would say below average in swimming. And after my first 200-meter swimming, I thought, oh, this is just terrible. I don't want to do this, or why am I even putting myself in this uncomfortable situation? I might as well just do more cycling or do something that I like. Why spend so much time trying something that I'm not good at? But then, I mean, obviously, I'm telling you this, right? So fast forward to today and to like a year, let's round it up to 2 years of practice, training, and learning about nutrition and everything. I can come now and say, oh, I did an Ironman, but it's not magic. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that whatever goal or whatever sport you want to try, it follows a process, and you just have to, I suppose, be patient with yourself and just understand that you're going to be bad at it for a fair bit, and then slowly you're going to be improving, and you may not realize it at first, but after a few, let's say, weeks, months, or after a certain time of effort and time that you put into it, you will realize, oh, look at this, how far have I come? And I think that's a big thing with whatever sport or with whatever hobby, activity, with whatever goal we have. And I have to give a big shout out to my friend Timur. I will leave the link of our podcast episode in the description in case you don't know who he is. And I remember him telling me, he sent me a message like, don't forget your starting point. And that is so crucial with anything that you decide to do. So going back to my story with jump rope, I could say, oh, I'm still below average, and it is probably true, right? But when you put things in perspective, never doing jump rope in my life, or only doing jump rope for 6 months or less, and then you see the progress, then it's like, okay, look, it's not too bad. Now, it will be a different story if I stay at this level after 5 years practicing and not seeing any progress. That would be a different story. I think this is also something that I tell my students when they come to me and they say, oh, my English sucks, or my English is really bad, or my Spanish is terrible, or whatever language it may be, right? And a part of me is always like, well, look, don't compare yourself to whoever, right? Don't compare yourself to someone you see on YouTube. Don't compare yourself to me, because even I've had students who are my age, right? And then they go, wow, Emilio, you speak English so good, or you speak Japanese, or you speak Portuguese, and I only speak English and Spanish. But that's not the right way to see at things, because it is so unbalanced. And a good example of this could be that in that same comparison, it's like, yes, maybe I speak 1 or 2 more languages than some of my students that are my age, but maybe they are engineers, maybe some of them are doctors, some of them are nurses, and they have 3 to 5 years experience, and that is something that I don't have. So when you start putting things in perspective, all of a sudden it's like, well, okay, this person can do this, but that shouldn't always be the best way to compare yourself. Like, I would go crazy if I start comparing my videos on YouTube and my podcast with Mr. Beast and Joe Rogan, because these guys are like at the very top of the game, and that's not usually the way to, let's say, to go about things, at least in my opinion. Obviously, it is good to look up to someone. I'm not saying, oh, I'm not gonna be Joe Rogan, so I shouldn't do a podcast. That's not what I'm trying to say. Or like, oh, I shouldn't play a sport or do this because I'm never gonna be as good as this other person. But rather, maybe taking that other person as inspiration and then going forward, but not forgetting that it should always be you versus you, or it should be basically you versus you yesterday, or you a few years ago. Because I've seen students who, for example, and this is one of the beautiful things about being a teacher, like I have taught people that go from, hello, how are you? My name is Emilio. I am from Venezuela. And then they go from that to texting me or sending me a message going, hey Emilio, do you still remember me? It's been 5 years. Right now I'm trying to get my PR. I'm gonna get a sponsor, or I am working as a chef, or I'm working in construction, or I'm working in whatever thing is. I want to get my PR. now let's do IELTS, let's do PTE. And God, I mean, that's something that sometimes you just never see coming. I mean, maybe, and what I mean by that is that, for example, when my students and those same people who tell me I want to get an IELTS 7 or an IELTS 6 or whatever score it might be, but for now let's say an IELTS or a PTE of 7 and 65, because that's a tough score, right? And then those people come to me and say, oh look, my English still sucks. And I'm just going, don't you see how far you have come? You went from struggling to introduce yourself to writing an academic essay on an exam under pressure to get PR in Australia. So to me, that's just crazy. And it's just a sign of lots of improvement. So whenever you are being tough on yourself, just remember where you started, you know? And the same thing could be said with, for example, language learning and with so many other things, with playing sports, with playing an instrument, with anything. So the moral of this part of the episode is, don't forget where you started, and remember, you versus you. That is probably like the healthiest and then best way to approach things. As long as there is a little bit of progress, and I'm quoting Mr. Beast here. I think he was saying, just upload 100 videos, don't talk to me, and after 100 videos, just try to improve something, 1%, just a tiny bit. And again, similar thing I tell my students who are doing PTE, for example. Oh, I have to improve my pronunciation. Well, look, don't focus on, you know, polishing your accent and fixing 100 words every day. Focused on a few sounds, get them right, and then just slowly start going. And you know, basically by doing that, in like the span of 2 to 3 weeks, you will go, wow, that's crazy, my scores are improving, and I'm not going crazy comparing myself with other people or doing things that don't actually work. So remember, you versus you, and that's it. And maybe by now some of you might be thinking, Emilio, all of that sounds amazing, you versus you, just start, blah blah blah, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, but then what if I don't have that push, or how should I get started? And I think, to me, again, not being a psychologist here or anything, but maybe it might just be that little voice on your head saying, what if, and the same thing could be said with like that uncertainty of what would have happened if I did this thing, or if I didn't do this thing. So it doesn't hurt to try something new, to see how you go. But on the more serious note, because the premise of this episode was with running and with sports, and this is coming from someone who was overweight, you know, more than half of my life. At least now, this later part of my life, I've been doing my best to be as healthy as I can. And you know, I always had a belly through middle school, high school, basically even when I came here to Australia. So at least for me, when it comes to sports and training, it was more like, it doesn't feel good being overweight. I don't like how I feel. I don't like putting jeans and the jeans don't close. So I would use that as my main drive, something that I don't like, and then try and give that a positive spin. Obviously, there are times where I don't feel like running, maybe I don't feel like doing whatever that thing is, but then I always look back and think about my goal. And maybe I might be repeating myself, but I remember that a story that I shared maybe on my previous episode was with studying Japanese. And I bring this up to you because studying Japanese for me is so important, and I think part of the reason is because it is something so unbelievably difficult. If your mother tongue is English or Spanish or basically any Romance language, almost like any language except Mandarin Chinese, Korean, and perhaps some other languages in Asia. So Japanese is super ultra hard. It's like, you know, it's in the top 4 most difficult languages. So for me, at the time, some part of me was like, oh, why should I continue studying Japanese? But then there was this conversation in an onsen, in a hot spring, with my father-in-law and this local Japanese old man, super friendly by the way, and he was talking to me. I could reply back to him, obviously nowhere near as fluent as he was. Then the two of them were having a chat, and I can tell you that I comfortably, without like too much pressure and focus, but I could comfortably understand about 80 to 90% of everything that they said. And then I remember telling my father-in-law later, like, wow, what I'm about to tell you, which is, I'm so happy I didn't quit studying Japanese when I was in Australia, because I could have stopped so much, so many years ago or so long ago, but I'm so happy that I kept going, that I kept listening to the radio, that I kept reading books and manga, and that I kept myself busy, that I wrote down kanji, because if I hadn't done that, maybe I wouldn't have understood 80 to 90% of this conversation, which, funny enough, is not in the test that I want to pass, but that's a completely different, that's just, that's life, You can get IELTS of 7, 8, 9, or you can get a full score on PTE, and then you go to a pub and try to talk to an Australian who has had 2 to 3 beers. That's a challenge, and if you're up for it, just go ahead and try it. But the point is just trying to stay consistent, and basically what I'm trying to say with all this long explanation is you need to find your why. And I think that by finding your why, it could be health, it could be that there is something you don't like, it could be that maybe you're just curious and you want to try something. Maybe you try that thing for the student and the person who asks this. Maybe you try running and you do it for a month, 2 months, and then you say, you know what, I don't really like running, but I do like the feeling of being healthy. So then you go, okay, maybe I'm not gonna do running, but maybe I'll do a different sport. It could be cycling, it could be, I don't know, whatever that thing may be. Or it could even be like, oh, I like feeling healthy, I'm going to go back to whatever other sport I was doing so that I feel good, like I used to feel back then. And my final tip to all of you would be to keep record of whatever that activity is. It could either be on your journal, it could be on your phone, it could be like you're just writing down whatever metrics you're using, how long you're exercising for, and then that way you can always look back and see, okay, this is my progress, or this is what I was doing. Now there are a bunch of apps and things, so again, use whatever works best for you, because you know what? Nobody knows you better than you. Boom. And look, with that, we'll probably wrap up this episode. I hope that you guys enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it for you. If you've got any questions, let me know either on social media, on the comments here on YouTube, obviously for the OGs on Spotify. Let me know as well. Do get in touch. And remember, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to send it to someone whom I enjoyed it as well. And I'll see you in the next one. Don't miss me too much, because I'll see you next week. So take care and bye for now.